Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. Hey, my name's Jon Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts for the show. And in this episode, you are going to hear myself and my partner, Les Hughes, have a conversation about time management for EntrePastors. It's probably one of the biggest hurdles that most pastors have. They would tell you that they don't even have enough time to do all that they need to do in their role as a pastor. How in the world am I supposed to start a business or launch a side hustle when I don't seem to have enough time just to even be a pastor? And so Les and I are going to share some tips on how to manage your time as an EntrePastor. And it may sound a little counterintuitive, but the reality is there's some ways that by being an EntrePastor, it'll actually help you. It kind of forces you to do a better job of time management and ministry and do both things very well instead of struggling in just one of those areas. So without any further ado, let's cut to this episode that Les and I did, time management for an EntrePastor. Check this out. We're going to talk about time management for an EntrePastor because, again, pastors are way too busy, and here we tell them to do more on top of an already overworked schedule and overcommitted and overwhelmed. So, Les, what would you say? What advice would you give and have you given to a pastor that kind of raises this very natural, very valid point?
It's a great question. Well, if they have a sense of overwhelm when it comes to that time, one of the first things I want to do is to find out where they're spending that time, right? Because we've all got the same 168 hours in a week. And there are people who achieve a ton of things in the same amount of time that other people don't seem to get very much done. So in the same way, if somebody were to come to me and say, my goodness, I just can't pay my bills, I don't know where all my money goes, I would start off by saying, well, let's talk about where all that money goes and find out. And in the same way, it's possible to do a time audit to really find out where it all goes. You might be surprised.
What does that look like, practically speaking, if someone's never done a time audit? It's like telling someone who's never budgeted their money, hey, write out a budget. They're like, what's a budget? So how would you advise someone to do a time audit?
There's two parts of it. There's one looks ahead and one looks behind or real time as it goes. So just as if you're keeping up with every single dollar that you were spending in a week, you'd have some way of recording that either on your phone or a little pad of paper or something. And when you fill your car up with gas, you would write that down. When you get a few groceries or take someone out to eat, you would write that down. And in the same way, you don't have to do, every single minute, but if you spend 15 minutes on a phone call, write that down. If you're in a meeting for an hour, you write that down. If you sleep a certain amount of time, you write that down. If you watch Netflix for a little while, you write that down. And then at the end of the week, you're going to have a really good idea of where that time's going.
Do I have to write down the time I spend on TikTok? Because I love TikTok.
Oh, no, you wouldn't have to keep up with that. That's too quick.
Good, because that might get a little convicting if I started tracking that. So
actually, your phone will do that for you. You've got apps that'll keep track of that stuff for you, so you don't have to keep track of that at all.
Some of us have wives that'll keep track of that for us too.
Indeed,
so helpful.
Indeed, gladly help you out.
Yeah, so a time audit is a good first step, just to know, Pastor, where are you spending your time and budgeting your time, so to speak. But then moving forward, the next thing we might say is, we know where we've been in terms of where our time has been going, but now let's look out into the future and get control of our calendar. You recommend a system for time blocking, having some kind of a system for blocking time. Tell us more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, and there are so many different systems, Jon, that you could use. People asking me which one I feel like is the best. I've got one that I use, but I've used several and will probably change again sometime. I would say that there's no one size fits all. It's the one that you'll use. It's the one that you'll do and the one that frees you up,
Oh.
So there's no system that's going to make you do better in planning for your day or for your week. That's something that's more internal. That's a frame of mind or a mindset. We could talk about that too, but I would say it's the one that you'll use. And normally, what I'll do is sometime on Sunday, late Sunday afternoon or early Sunday evening, after the weekend's kind of gearing down and before the week cranks back up, I'll just take my calendar out and look at the things that I know that I need to do that I've already written down, like meetings that are already scheduled, and then the blocks of time between those hard and fast appointments, the anniversaries or birthdays or commitments that you need to make on an ongoing, the staff meetings. Those are things that are almost non-negotiable. They're at the same place every year or every week. Then I would say look at those blocks of time and at least start processing and thinking about what each day needs to look like. For many pastors, they front load the first part of their week in preparing for Sunday, so that if things come up and there are emergencies later in the week, they're not caught off guard and they don't end up doing a Saturday night special, or or Sunday morning. Others do a little bit better to have their their brains kind of fried from Sunday. And so they do better in having their meetings up front in the week and then more sermon preparation toward the end. It's whatever is the best rhythm for you, but rather than be passive about it and let someone else set that agenda, man, please, pastor, get out there, or leader, get out there ahead of it and you be proactive. I promise you, if you don't plan out your day or week, others are more than happy to do that for you.
Absolutely.
But that's not the best.
Absolutely. I think that's really the big thought here, is that you take control of your calendar. I hope everyone in our audience uses a calendar and actually utilizes that tool. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. Some people just try and hold it all in their head and don't put anything in writing, and that's just a recipe for chaos and disorder and disorganization in your life. So use the calendar, but more importantly, take control of your calendar. Pastor, I want you to know you have permission to set your time budget, if you will, those 168 hours that we've all been given. And you have the ability to take control of that and not live in constant reaction mode, which I think is so easy to do in ministry, to just get into that mode where we're constantly reacting to the next fire that needs to be put out or the next issue instead of directing where that goes. Les, you were telling me about, and I've heard this before too. I don't know if it's like an object lesson or kind of just a cliche metaphor, but of filling a vessel with, various sizes of rocks and gravel and sand. Explain that for those that maybe have never heard that concept, because it makes sense here.
Yeah, if you think about it, just having a glass cylinder, all right, something like you would put sometime at the Christmas season, my wife has these with a bunch of ornaments in it. So just think of a glass cylinder. And if you have rocks and sand and pebbles, if you fill it 3/4 of the way with sand and then put some pebbles in it and then try to put the big rocks in it after all, the big rocks last, chances are they are not going to fit. But if you pour out the contents and do the reverse, where you put the big rocks in there first and then the smaller pebbles and then fill the rest with sand, it all fits. I've actually done that as an exercise. Maybe you have too, as you've done a talk or a message or a sermon. You can do it with, tennis balls and marbles and sand if you want to, but the principle is still the same. So just think of your day like that. There are some big rocks that need to be done. And then there is some sand that needs to be put in there too. If you fill your day up with sand, you'll get to the end of the day and the big rocks won't fit. So put those big rocks in there first.
Is TikTok sand? Is that what you're saying? I kind of heard you picking on my TikTok.
It's kind of sandy. It's kind of sandy, John.
Yeah, you're right. TikTok needs to be sprinkled around all of the big rocks.
Right.
So thanks. This is helpful for me too, Les, as we're going through this. But another thing that I would recommend to that pastor as they're getting control of their calendar, something that has been super, super helpful for me is what I would call like automation tools or automation systems, where you can put some of your calendar stuff on autopilot, if you will. And I'm going to share one, and maybe Les, I'll ask if you have any like tips or practical tools, but this is just one example, but it integrates with a lot of things in my world. So a few years ago, someone turned me on to, at the time, I used a tool called Appointlet. Now I switched over to something called Calendly. So it's like calendar with an LY on the end, Calendly. And it's basically a scheduling tool. So if you have different meetings that you need to set up with people in the week. So for instance, with me as a podcaster, I schedule a lot of podcast interviews. I get asked to be on multiple podcasts. When I was pastoring, I would have those people come up after church, hey, can I meet with you this week, John? Calendly is, and again, there's many of other services like this, but it provides a link where on the back end you can set up those time blocks that we talked about, Les. So if I'm available for meetings with church people, on Tuesdays from 9 to noon, I make that available and it syncs up with my Google Calendar. It probably syncs up with other ones, but I use a Google Calendar. And so if somebody wants to meet with me, I give them the link, and when they click into that, they can only see the times that I have set as, available. And then watch this. Once they schedule that, it puts it automatically on my calendar. So I'm not going and writing it down or forgetting to write it down. The minute they schedule that appointment with me, it goes on my calendar. It's got all their contact information. And this is amazing, Les. It'll even sync up with Zoom. So if it's a virtual meeting via Zoom, it'll create the Zoom link and share that with myself and them. And again, this may not sound transformational to people, but let me just quickly describe the old process. The old way was, for instance, Les, if you want to get on my calendar, you would email me. I would email you back. I would give you some dates and times. You would take 2 days to get back to me. And then some of those dates and times have been taken. So we're going to spend hours going back and forth via email.
Sure.
Once we finally get it, I got to go write it on my calendar or type it into my calendar. Then I got to go into Zoom, set up the appointment, send you the link. And Calendly does all of that automated like that. Can you see how much time that saves and buys back for me? So that's just one example of what I'm referring to when I talk about a system or a tool for automation. What about you? Is there anything that like that works for you?
Big time. Well, I like Calendly as well. Mine aren't necessarily tools as much as just practices or maybe hacks. Okay. So just a couple of things to think about that are in a leader's or a pastor's world. A lot of times people see you, on Sunday. And so that's a convenient time for them to try to set something up with you. And typically it looks like them approaching you either right before you preach or just after, or maybe between services if you have multiple services. And somebody used to say, "Hey, pastor, I really need to get with you for a few minutes. What's your schedule look like this week? What it'd be a good time for me to come by?" And the temptation, because we want to minister to people, we want to help people, we want to serve people. The temptation is to get out our calendar or our phone right then and say, "Well, let's just find a time." Mentally, you're not there. That's not what you're thinking about. And you don't know what else is going on in that other person's life. So what you're doing, if you do that, John, you're rewarding a practice that you don't want repeated, but it will be repeated if that's your response. Like you're rewarding that behavior. They don't mean anything bad by it. It's just what people do. It's the path of least resistance. Rather than do that, what I usually try to do is to say, "Hey, you know what? That would be great. I'd love to meet with you and talk with you. Why don't you just give me a call or call the office tomorrow?" If you're used to using an assistant, have them call your assistant or have them call you the next day and say, "Call me. I'll get out my calendar. We'll find a time." As I'm sitting here, John, I promise you that at least half of the time people do not follow up.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you need to blow people off. I'm just saying what seems what's convenient on Sunday may not be necessary on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. So just that one hack, that one habit will save you some of those time, because some of those experiences and some time. Another thing to do is when you explain to someone that a time that they suggest won't work, "Pastor, I really need to see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. That's it." Or let's just say, "Tomorrow after work, I got to come by and see you." Well, suppose your son has a little league baseball game, and that's not that urgent to the other person, but it's very important to you and to your son. The temptation is to say, "You know what? I cannot meet then. Man, my son's got a ball game. I really need to be there for that." Well, what you've just said is that to that other person, you've said that something as trivial as a baseball game is more important than their crisis, their marriage, whatever that might be. You haven't said that at all, but it's important to your family. So to get around that, all you should say is, you know what, I've got a conflict then that I must keep.
Yeah.
Let's find another time.
Yeah.
And then they can fill in that gap. You've just told them that it's really, really important that you keep that. And if that's not enough for someone, that's probably a different podcast for a different day. That's a different issue.
Honestly, that transitions well right into the next thing we're going to talk about. But I'm going to back up just a minute before we go to that and say, with the Calendly tool that I mentioned, it was kind of similar hack, different tool. And it's when I would say to that person who wants to get on my calendar, absolutely, we can meet. Here's my link. What that tells them is my pastor is available for me. And you're right, Les, most of the time, that's all people really want to know, is that their pastor is available if they really need something.
Yeah.
But then when they click into that Calendly link and they see, oh, wow, my pastor isn't just sitting in his office 40 hours a week waiting for me to stop by. I chuckle. I had a guy one time, and every church has that one or two just special folks. And you're laughing because
Sure.
you got them too.
No.
Don't say their names. But this gentleman stops by my office one day. I'm in there working, and he's got his puppy in his arms with him, and he comes in. I'm like, hey, how you doing? And he said, well, my dog has an appointment at the vet in 2 hours, and I don't have anything to do between now and then. So, and kind of implied that he was going to sit in my office for 2 hours. And I said, well, Dan, I do have something to do for the next 2 hours, so you're going to have to go be bored somewhere else. But man, when they see that Calendly link and they look in there and see the limited amount of time, it communicates something important to them, that my pastor doesn't just sit around and wait for me to stop in and see him. Like there's his time is valuable and it's limited. So that's another helpful tool. Something else I would say that may fit under I don't know if it's really an automated thing, but it's a tool, it's a system to some degree. And that's having a virtual assistant. Like that has been a game changer for me over the years. I've had different levels of administrative assistants and virtual assistants. Is that a tool that you utilize, Les, a VA?
I do for other things, not for my calendar, but I do for other things that just save me from, I heard one time a leader say one time that, especially for a pastor or a Christian leader, do the things that only you can do. My virtual assistant's very capable and very skilled. She can load podcasts, she can edit, she can write some copy, she can send emails. I can do some of those things, but she can probably do them a lot quicker. Yep. And she can't do some of the content creation that I'm the one that needs to be doing it. Yeah. She can't do this interview. So I would say, hand some of those things off so that you can focus on and keep the main thing.
One of the things I love about a virtual assistant, as opposed to just kind of your traditional like church secretary or in-house admin assistant, is that because they're virtual, because they don't belong to your church and sit under your preaching and sit in your pews on Sundays, if and when there's kind of a business issue or a job performance issue, it's a lot easier to let a VA go than it is someone who's a part of your church and calls you pastor. I've been through those stories, where, man, we've had to make a staff decision in the church. Someone just wasn't performing for the job they were hired to do. And it almost never ends well. I rarely have had people go, Pastor Jon, thank you for your guidance and instruction in my life. I receive it, that correction, and I'll look for a different job. Usually they look for a different church too.
Yeah.
So the VA is kind of builds in that barrier.
Yep,
and
that's good.
So it's a good time hack, to just hand some of that administrative stuff off. There are people, Pastor, are you ready for this? There are people who actually like that stuff. And the stuff that drains you, there's people who get energy by picking up some of those pieces. So God bless those people that do that. Couple more things we want to get to, Les. The next one that you and I kind of mapped out here is this thought of a pastor setting healthy and realistic boundaries in their life. I think this is one of the biggest ones. Not that these other things we've mentioned are not important, but you can time audit and time block and automate things till your heart's content. But if you, pastor, do not set healthy boundaries, and if you are not willing to take ownership and set realistic boundaries of what it means to be a pastor and what your role is and how much they're paying you to be available for, none of that other stuff matters, because you'll just time block all of your time into ministry. So what would you say to that pastor that's struggling with setting healthy boundaries or realistic boundaries for their role as a pastor?
Well, first of all, I would think about the relationships in your life. And while you're the people that you shepherd, they do have a special relationship with you. They have an affection and a fondness for you. It's not all at the same level. It's not all the same. And when it's all said and done, first of all, they might have in a lifetime, they might have many pastors, and they might not, but your children have one dad,
Yeah.
and your wife has one husband, or your husband has one wife. And so those are the primary relationships. Jesus, I have no doubt, loved everyone that he came into contact with, but he spent the majority of his ministry time with not even 12, with 3.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people didn't always like that, but he set boundaries, and we would do well to set healthy boundaries too.
I'm glad you mentioned that Jesus model because, yeah, I mean, he didn't always just heal every last person that was there. I'm sure there were still a line of people waiting to be touched by Jesus when he called the office hours. We see him getting up early and going to solitary places to pray and to have that self time, that time with the Father, and that self care maybe is what we would say in our modern world, but where he's
Yeah.
creating that space for himself to be restored. And and so I'll say this, Les. I've been on record saying this many times, and I'll just boldly own it, even though it's not politically correct and church people wouldn't like this. But I'm a firm believer that the average pastor spends way too much time working in the church than certainly when it comes to what they're compensated for. Churches pay a pastor what they call a full-time salary, and according to the marketplace, we should probably call that a part-time salary. And so my encouragement to many pastors is stop working so many hours in the church. And don't ask anyone's permission. Don't go to your board. Don't ask the elders. Don't ask for a church vote. Don't ask Gladys. They're all going to say, we want you full time. Just do it. Set your schedule and have other outlets. And again, I'm not saying don't do your work as a pastor. I'm not saying don't, to slough off on your sermon prep or meeting the needs that arise in the church or offering the leadership that's needed. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's possible for you to produce results as a pastor and not spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing that to the neglect of your family, your personal health, your marriage, your finances. So make the room for something else in your life and don't apologize for it. I want pastors to hear you have permission to build something else into your life and to put church in its proper context, even if they call you a full-time pastor. That's just me.
That's
Les.
right. And that comes full circle. And I agree 100%. And I'll follow it up with this. You will get more done in less time if you plan, if you're intentional, if you can use a system, if some of these systems help you, and just spend time, even if it's just thinking time, to pull away and think about that week. Think about the rhythm of your day or the rhythm of your week or your month. There is in my opinion, an excellent book. This is not for everybody, but if you don't mind bluntness and straightforwardness, there's an excellent book by a man named Keith Cunningham that's called The Road Less Stupid. It's actually a marketplace book, but even the Road Less Stupid. And in that book, one of the real takeaways for me is each chapter includes what he calls think time or thinking time, where you just stop, block out everything, get out just to something to write with, and you just think and then write those thoughts down. It's now that he gives a kind of a roadmap and a way to do it, but you're not just daydreaming, but you can. John's not talking about not living up to your responsibilities and not fulfilling your role or your duties. He's just saying doing it in a way where you're as good a steward with that time as you are a steward of the resources or the money that God gives you. It's all a gift. This is about really spending it wisely and getting the most out of it.
Love it. Les, the final thing that we want to say, there's probably more we could come up with, but the final thing as far as the list today, as we talk about advice we would give a pastor who's struggling with time, is simply this: to delegate responsibilities to other people. And again, this gets back to the concept that the average pastor is overworked. They do too much. I would contend, and I'm on record in my other podcast as saying, it's, to me, it's one of the problems with the full-time pastorate is that we present ourselves as these full-time pastors, which then the church interprets, oh, that means you do all the work. And I just come on Sunday and watch you do all the work. And so we have so many pastors that are carrying responsibilities in the church that they're not gifted for, Les. They have not been gifted by God to do every role in the church and
Right.
fill all the needs. And yet there's this external pressure from the congregation. And then ultimately we take that on and adopt it as our own, claim ownership of it. And now we have this internal pressure that I have to do all the work. And one way to buy back a tremendous amount of time is to learn how to delegate and not be the primary ministry provider in the church. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are, look at, if you're doing everything that somebody else really could and might even love to do, you're robbing them from an opportunity to contribute to the kingdom. And you could get there early enough to make coffee for everybody. You're a servant, you would bless people. But hey, guess what? There may be somebody else that can do that while you're doing something else that only you can do. You could stay behind and make sure all the lights are out and the air conditioner is set back the way that it needs to be. Or could it be that there's somebody that's really looking for something to do in ministry, but they really don't feel gifted to teach a class? They're not qualified to be a deacon, but you know what? They could go around and make sure the doors are locked or the air conditioner is set right or the lights are turned off. You don't have to do everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna share a surprise, Les. Are you ready to be surprised? I didn't even tell you I was gonna do this, but I
I'm
want to.
ready, man.
All
Go.
right, I want to tell you what's going to be available as a part of the backstage content for this week's episode, and it ties into this idea of delegating responsibilities. Because the average person listening to this, if we were to say, well, just hire some staff, and hand stuff off to staff. Man, the average pastor, at least in my world, primarily specializing in small town rural churches, I hear pastors saying, John, my church is barely paying me. We can't afford staff. Well, I want to tell you a quick story, and the Cliff Note version of it is this. Years ago, one of the most game-changing moments in the life of the church that my wife and I planted and led was when someone taught us how to hire staff with no budget, where we essentially built out a volunteer staff. And so years later, I created a course, and it's simply called How to Hire Staff with No Budget. And we share the story and the process that we went through to develop a very high level commitment, gifted staff in our church that primarily operated as volunteer. And here's what I'm going to say this week for our backstage listeners. I'm going to make that course available absolutely free. I've sold it for $100 in the past. I'm going to give that course away, but here's the catch. If you are a backstage listener, you just need to reach out to me. No, actually, I'm going to do it like this, Les. I'll actually put the audio in there in the backstage thing. I was going to make them
Okay.
email me, and I'd give it to them. I'll save you a step. I'm going to put it right in the backstage content. So if you're like, well, John, how do I get access to that? If you just go to EntrePastors.com, you can see the different ways to subscribe to some of our products, and that's the lowest available product in terms of pricing. It's $9.99 a month, $9.99 a month, and you have access to the premium backstage content. So in this case, I'm giving you an entire course on how to hire staff with no budget. Now, here's one last thing I'll say.
Sign me up.
Okay, I'll turn this over to you, Les, after I
Yeah.
say this. The good news, bad news. Good news is it will absolutely change your life because you will learn how to delegate and hand real responsibility of ministry off to gifted individuals, and they're in your church. The bad news is it's kind of like a rocket leaving planet Earth. It takes a lot of momentum to get that up. So I'm not underselling it. There is going to be
Yeah.
work required, Pastor, to build that team on your part. It's called leadership. And it's kind of like Ephesians 4 that talks about us having this role of equipping the saints to do the work of ministry. So there is some work on the front end, but the good news is once you get those teams up and developed and running in your church, you literally can start to step back into those areas that only you do or that you do the best, that you're gifted for. And you're going to notice some real time freed up week to week because there's real weight of ministry that has been handed off to other people. So, man, if we can help empower some pastors to get hours back in their weekly schedule, they're going to find time in those 168 hours that we've all been given each week to apply themselves in some new areas of entrepreneurship and development. So anything else that you have as far as that goes, Les?
I love that resource. I can't wait to dig into it myself. It sounds great. And, we realize that the things that we're talking about it's not an easy shift. Okay. It's not an easy shift of mindset, but I promise you it's one worth making, and it will get easier as you get a little better at saying no, or not yet, or how about this, and you get those systems in place and those habits in place. It will get easier over time, and you'll be glad you did.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week, guys. We hope you found this content helpful, and I really think we've shared some valuable things that will help you get some of your time back and manage your time on purpose and intentionally a little bit better. So, Les, what can we tell our audience as far as ways to connect with us and go deeper? If they've been enjoying the content, but they're like, how do I get more of this? What are some ways they can go deeper into our community and connect even more with us and others like them?
Well, feel free to go back and listen to the other episodes of this podcast, because there's some really great stuff on there, great success stories and advice from experts, as well as just us sharing from some of our experiences. And then go to our main website, that EntrePastors.com. Folks, we've really tried to make that very, very simple, and it's not cluttered with a lot of extra stuff. If you go there, you'll be able to find out how you can take your next steps. If you want to go any deeper, you can go as deep as you want.
Yeah. And again, this is not a high pressure sales pitch. We just want you to know there is premium content. There is a membership course membership community that has some course material built into it. That's got a Facebook group, that's got a monthly live Q&A call. So that's what we mean when we talk about going deeper. We've got our EntrePastors Mastermind, which is just getting up and going. That's an additional 2 calls every month where we really go individually deep into your story and put you on the hot seat, and how can we serve you on the entrepreneurial path that you're on. And so again, there's differing levels of support that we can offer you there, but wherever you find yourself in there, just know that we're here for you. We're cheering for you. And we truly want to help pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs in the world. We think that's a good thing. So guys, thanks so much for listening to the show. We'd encourage you to subscribe, leave a rating and review. And we hope you continue to come back week after week and get encouragement and be blessed by the content here. So Les, have a great week, my friend.
You too, John. Bye, everybody.
Right, see ya. Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group. Answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.